I've officially deemed November 21st a Wicked holiday. That means it's gonna be Wicked time. Like Christmas time, we're gonna have Wicked time.
Wicked is basically a national holiday in the US. And if I have successfully done what I have set out to do, then happy Wicked Day to all who celebrate. Now, I'm currently in Nigeria, where it's not as big of a deal, which is interesting since the lead, Miss Elphaba herself, Cynthia Erivo, is Nigerian. You would think they'd be claiming this movie like the World Cup. And since the theater kid in me physically cannot stop talking about Wicked, I figured I might as well make a big video covering everything. So I've got my notes, I've got my thoughts, and today's deep dive should give you a great complete breakdown. The movie, the book, and the Broadway legacy. So let's begin where it all started. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum is a children's fantasy novel about Dorothy, a girl from Kansas who one day, a cyclone picks her up from her house with her and Toto inside and drops them in a magical land called Oz. Her house lands on the Wicked Witch of the East, freeing the Munchkins. Dorothy just wants to get home, so they tell her to go see the Wizard of Oz. On the day she meets the Scarecrow, who wants a brain, on the way, she meets the Scarecrow, who wants a brain, the Tin Woman, a heart, and the Cowardly Lion, courage. They're all looking for something they feel they're missing. The twist? The wizard is just a regular man using tricks and illusions, and Dorothy learns she had the power to go home the whole time, thanks to her silver shoes. The movie, 1939. The classic MGM film shows the same outline, but with iconic changes. Dorothy, Judy Garland, is swept away in a tornado, and the world transforms into Technicolor once she lands in Oz. Her shoes become ruby slippers, the Wicked Witch becomes a bigger villain chasing Dorothy down, and in the end, Dorothy learns she can return home by clicking her heels together and wakes up realizing the whole journey might have been a dream. And that's what you missed on I wanna go Liberia. The Witches Take Broadway. The Wizard of Oz, Broadway. This stage version is basically the 1939 movie on stage. Same heart, same classic songs. Over the Rainbow, If I Only Had a Brain, We're Off to See the Wizard, the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. You get the point. So now The Wiz. The Wiz is a soulful Black reimagining of Oz using R&B, funk, and gospel vibes. Dorothy's journey remains the same, but the tone and cultural approach are totally different. I just saw the latest version of this on Broadway that was produced by Candy Burris, and it's currently on tour. So if you are interested, definitely check to see when they're coming to a city near you. It has iconic songs like Ease on Down the Road, Home, and my personal favorite, The Wiz. It brings swagger, personality, and a distinctly Black storytelling lens to Oz. Then there's Wicked, not a retelling, a prequel, a reframing of the Oz story. It focuses on Elphaba, the misunderstood Wicked Witch of the West, Glinda, the popular Good Witch, with more depth than anyone gives her credit for, and it explores how they met at school, became unlikely friends, and how power, corruption, and prejudice tore them apart. By the time Dorothy arrives on stage, you understand the story was never black and white. And the music, legendary. Defying Gravity, popular for good. Cultural reset. Wicked the Phenomenon. Wicked opened on Broadway on October 30th, 2003, starring Idina Menzel as Elphaba and Kristen Chenoweth as Glinda. Since then, it is the fourth longest running Broadway show as of 2025. Over 15 million people have seen it on Broadway. It's been performed in 16 countries and translated into 6 languages. The Tony Awards for 2004, Wicked gathered 10 nominations, winning 3 wins: Best Actress, Idina Menzel, Best Costume Design, and Best Scenic Design. So the movie was destined for greatness, and it delivered. Wicked 2024, the movie. with director John M. Chu, Elphaba Cynthia Erivo, and Glinda Ariana Grande. Box office worldwide grosses was a total of $735 million, with an estimated profit of $230 million. Additional digital revenue, $100 million. Global impact surpassed $700 million globally. Biggest opening weekend ever for a Broadway musical movie. Highest grossing Broadway musical adaptation with 10 Oscar nominations, and it won Best Costume and Production Design. Wicked Part 1 tells the story of how Elphaba and Glinda met at Shiz, go from enemies to roommates to best friends, and get wrapped up in the wizard's political schemes and how Elphaba becomes branded as Wicked. It ends with an iconic Defying Gravity moment, the turning point where Elphaba rejects the wizard's lies and claims her power. So, the movie opens up with this big dramatized version with great choreography and very imaginative landscaping, bringing you into the world of Oz with the Munchkins singing "No One Mourns the Wicked." And then Glinda is brought a question by one of the Munchkins saying, "Weren't you friends with her?" And this goes into the in-depth story, which is how this book opens. Wicked the book by Gregory Maguire opens telling us the journey of how Elphaba grew up and how she was raised. This is something that the musical took out when it was brought to Broadway, but the movie brought back in as far as Elphaba's journey growing up and being raised. They start touching on not just her backstory as far as her being born and her being born green and being automatically unloved by her parents, but this talks more in depth about her mother and how she is an alcoholic and is very promiscuous and unfaithful to her husband. And something that isn't touched on in the movie or musical is that Elphaba and her sister actually had a brother, and so the brother is the one that her mother suffered from passing away during childbirth with. In the movie and in the musical, they say that it was while Elphaba's mother was giving birth to her younger sister, Nessa Rose, but it was actually their brother. Once we discover Elphaba and we're moved straight into Shiz, that's very similar to how the book does it. We talk about Elphaba's growing up and her lived experience in depth in the very first part of this book, which took up a majority. It's a total of 70 pages, and that was the hardest part to read because I found that to be the most uninteresting part. The rest of this was a pretty easy read. I will be blatant and honest in saying that I have yet to finish the book. If you can see where my black lining is, it's not at the end of the book, but I did read up to the part where they meet the wizard. And I will be doing a part 2 for this, so this is why this is the breakdown for part 1. I have seen the movie and I have seen the musical. So this is still a great in-depth synopsis to definitely catch before you see Wicked Part 2. And getting back into the character analysis that we're doing. When we meet Glinda, very similar to how she is portrayed in the movie and in the musical, she is very shallow. We are given a bit more color to how her and Elphaba become friends. How it's done in the movie is that we're opened up with that loathing kind of title sequence. Not title sequence, but it's a sequence in which we're being given the story of how they become an unlikely duo throughout that song. And then it escalates to everything happening with Elphaba when she goes to the dance, the school dance, and Glinda and Elphaba start dancing together and they have that big friendship moment. They expound on that in a more relatable way in the book than in the movie. How it happens in the book is that Glinda comes to appreciate Elphaba for who she is as a person and starts to dislike her friends entirely. And this is before they go meet the wizard. So in the movie, Glinda is still friends with everybody. She's still trying to portray herself as somebody who's popular, but in the book, she comes to that realization on her own. She forgoes the rest of her friends, seeing them as being shallow and not really in-depth beings, and seeing more relatability and having more appreciation for who Elphaba is as a person, and so gearing to more towards her. And then a person that definitely gets a lot more color in the book than in the movie is Bach. Bach is very similar to, if you're into Sister Sister, if you watched Sister Sister growing up, he comes more across as Roger. He's definitely a more reoccurring character in the lives of Elphaba and Glinda in the book. It starts off with Bach already knowing Elphaba and actually on their first encounter calling her Elfie. I found that to be very interesting, in fact. When we see or we discover Bach as a character, it starts off with him trying to, right off the bat, get Elphaba to get him and Glinda together. And Elphaba obliges and has preconceived ideals as to how this is going to go, and she's not wrong. She allows and arranges for Glinda to agree to meet with Bach, and Glinda tells him off right away that, hey, we come from different classes, we come from different styles of life, and this could never work out because I'm from this part of the country and you're from Munchkin Land, and I would never take you seriously as a suitor. And he says automatically that, like, hey, you know, that's totally fine, I just want to be your friend. And this equates to an unlikely friendship that continues on for the foreseeable future, and Bach's infatuation with Glinda does wear off over time. And in fact, in doing so, right around when Bach starts truly seeing Glinda as just a friend and is no longer infatuated with her, he's given the chance to develop a relationship with Nessarose, who in the book no one takes a liking to. Nessarose is seen as somebody who definitely takes Elphaba for granted and takes being the favorite of her father very seriously, and definitely isn't warm or caring or considerate of her sister at all, which is mirrored a lot in the movie, and you see that happening a lot in the movie. And I think that that's really frustrating and is definitely extended on a lot more in the book than it is in the movie as far as her and Nessa's relationship goes. Nessa in the movie is seen as somebody who definitely doesn't stick up for her sister, but isn't as harsh and as demeaning as she is in the book. So if you do get a chance to read the book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Another big revelation that the book changes from other previous materials is that Bach doesn't look like this. He looks more like this. And that took me for a loop-de-loop-de-loop. The way how they frame it in the book is that he is a prince who comes from a different way of life, and he's not only black, he's not only dark-skinned, but he also has tattoos that are blue. And he's depicted as somebody who has a more Afrocentric look to himself. It isn't just a cleaned up black person, but more somebody that looks like one of Cynthia's people, if you know what I mean. And I think that it's interesting that the musical went in a completely different direction as far as the framing of who Fiyero is. And I think that the musical choosing to keep Fiyero white in the movie is a choice. And I can't wait to hear more about Fiyero. In the book, he's not covered as much, and he's not seen as much as a romantic interest thus far as how I've gotten in the book. Fiyero does come in later as far as when he joins the school, so that's still true, but he's definitely not so far seen as a romantic interest from Glinda or Elphaba so far. So that's very different. There are more male characters in the book than they are in the movie and in the musical, the same way how Glinda has friends. Bach is definitely seen as the biggest male lead in the book as opposed to Fiyero, so far as I've gotten in this book.
Does that baby have an agent? But either way, setting your best friend on fire Not great.
fun.
Not good.
No.
Not preferred.
It's kind of important just because the...
Oh my god, you're singing. Wait. Best moment in any movie musical ever in the history of the world.
Let's see, who did I forget? The Wizard. So the Wizard isn't covered much in the book so far. He's just seen as this kind of figure that has changed a lot of things he's talked more so about than taking place in and being in scenes specifically as the Wizard. He's more talked about, similar to how he is in all movie and musical adaptations. It's not until like the end or at the apex of the film that the Wizard gets to actually take on place of himself and like actually speak and talk as the Wizard. I haven't yet met the Wizard as I am reading the book currently right now. However, I think that the Wizard's importance is definitely made blatantly aware and clear as far as his impact on the society that Shiz exists in and that the world of Oz exists in. In the book, it definitely gives off taking place more towards where the original story began, and it definitely exists in the world of the 1800s, in which if you've watched Bridgerton, you might understand what society standards are, because in the book, although these girls are taking on higher education, they still have to have chaperones, and the schools are separate. And they only come together towards the middle of the book, where the scenes with the doctor, the goat, are very different. The story of the goat is very different from the movie and musical adaptations and in the book. The goat isn't just taken away and taken out of office and is no longer able to work. He is killed in the book. And the goat being killed is what brings both schools together and is what makes the school a co-ed university. And I found that to be very interesting because the goat dying is delivered of immense importance. And when we get into the basic life of how the world of Oz is developed, not only do the girls have chaperones, but what is different is the role of Elphaba's father. Elphaba's father isn't the mayor, he's actually a priest. And I think that the religious undertones of the book are a lot more visible and extreme and are taken out to be palatable for other audiences in the musical and in the movie for that reason. But I do find it to be very interesting that Nessa Rose takes on a lot of the more religious intensity that her father has, and I find that to be very interesting. What doesn't change and what is harped a bit more on are the political implications of what the Wizard is trying to do in society. And similar to the score and the vibe of the movie opening up with propaganda against Elphaba, it's a similar undertone to where Madame Morrible, out of all people, is the one that opens up with a poem during an assembly saying that animals are meant to be seen and not heard. And so that legacy is definitely developed a bit more. Not legacy, that story is definitely developed a bit more and takes on a bigger role in the book. Another thing, and of what I just read in the book, is Madame Morrible presents jobs to just Glinda, not just Elphaba, but presents these positions of power to Nessa Rose too. After Glinda's Alma passes away, Madame Morrible, as an exchange of power, brings up the chance for a position of power for these three girls. And I find it to be very interesting that this is how the book tells it as opposed to the movie and the musical. And that's where I've kind of ended it as far as reading the book. So I'm going to continue to break down how it happens. In the movie, The Wizard writes a letter to Elphaba giving her a chance to actually come to Shiz. and not to come to Shiz, but to come to the Emerald City and meet him. And upon meeting him, nobody is expecting Elphaba to read out the Grimoire, and she is able to read it out and cast a spell automatically. Her powers surpass Madame Orable right away. And not only that, but she automatically is able to see and know that the wizard has no real powers. And upon seeing that and knowing that, and upon the portrayal of her powers being used for what she doesn't want them to be used for, because the first spell that they make her cast is making the monkeys fly. And when Madame Orable says, oh, this is going to make them great spies, she realizes that what she wants and what they want are two different things. And so because she doesn't want to have her powers be used for the wizard, she then decides to move on her own. And that's how we get Defying Gravity, that's how we get the broom, that's how we get her flying off on her own, that's how we get Madame Orable calling her wicked, that's how we get Madame Orable using her green skin against her and saying that her green skin is an ailment to why she is wicked. And the propaganda begins automatically. They start saying that, like, oh, she's so wicked that she casted the spell against the monkeys, when that's what the wizard made her do. And I think that the impact of perception versus reality is a very strong theme within the movie, and I can't wait to see it expounded on in this next section. So if you're wondering why the character breakdown focuses more on the book and the movie, then it's because those are the versions that are just fresh in my mind. And I'm still reading the book, and I stopped right when they are bringing the girls to Emerald City. So if you do want a book specific video, let me know in the comments. And I haven't seen the Broadway show since I was in middle school. And because of that reason, when I go back to America after this trip, I'm going to see Wicked Part 2, as well as going back to the theater to see it on Broadway. So be sure to hit that notification bell so that you know exactly when the Part 2 analysis drops. And if you stay here this long, you might as well subscribe to join the Royal Village. So give me a hype, give me a like, and drop this emoji if you made it to the end. And remember to be the change you want to see in the world.